What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Jaguars Fan Battle podcast. Today is Tuesday, August 29th, and you might be wondering why we're on air today. Well, earlier than expected. Usually we go live at 8 o'clock on Tuesdays, but today we have a special guest, and we wanted to go a little bit earlier today. Um, and I am Matthew G., one of your hosts, joined by Cody Cold. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And our special guest, Tony.
Matt, Cody, appreciate you guys having me on today. Yeah.
Tony Smith. I don't know if it's about
Yeah,
as generic of an American name as you can think of.
You gotta do better on these
Yeah.
introductions,
Yeah,
man. You gotta be like,
From an Italian family with my very generic American name. Yeah.
So I'd assume Anthony's the full first name. Did I get muted? Sorry.
Yeah, Anthony's the full first name.
Okay.
My mom's side of the family is all Italian. The maiden name on that side is Ginsanti. So Smith is who she married.
Oh.
So my parents are John and Mary Smith. Very original. Yeah.
Well,
the nickname's starting to make more sense now. Fat Tony is like an Italian mobster name kind of thing.
Yeah, that's where the whole thing came from. Dempsey heard that I was Italian. He was like, "What are you in the witness protection?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "What do you like, Fat Tony Salerno?" I was like, "No." And he's like, "That's what we're going to call you, Fat Tony." And it's stuck. It's stuck around for almost 2 decades now. Yeah.
I need to backtrack on what I said. It's not as generic as it used to be. The names these days, I probably couldn't even spell if I tried.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe 10, 15 years ago it was generic. But, it's unique today.
I mean, it's mostly like Jaden. It's mostly like Jaden, Braden, Aiden, stuff like that now.
Yeah.
So for those viewers and listeners that don't know who Tony Smith is actually co-host of the Jaguars Today show on 1010XL 92.5 FM, the local sports radio station for Jacksonville that covers the Jaguars amongst other regional teams. They are on air, I believe. What is it, Monday through Friday, 10 to noon?
That is us. Yep, Jaguars Today.
And how long? Well, okay, so we talked about this before. So for our listeners and our viewers, if you don't mind, Tony, going into your career and how you got to where you are today as a national treasure of Northeast Florida.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I actually I was working part-time at a movie theater here in town, over at the Regal here in town on Phillips Highway. And one of the guys I was working with was a guy named Ryan Green, who's now better known as Hacker. And Hacker got an internship at a local sports radio station in town. And he came to me one day and he said, they're looking for interns. He knew I was into sports too. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to check that out. I went over, interviewed for the job, actually interviewed with Mike Dempsey to get that job as an intern, and got the job, stuck around, got to the point where I was getting paid, which is much better than being an intern, doing the production stuff, switched stations at one point in time. So I came over to 1010XL when it opened back in 2006 when the radio station opened up. And then I've been with them since the beginning. I was originally producing in the afternoon. Then Dempsey knew that I wanted to do on-air stuff, and an opportunity came open, and he was like, hey, you want to come in with me for a day or two a week? And I was like, absolutely. And so Dempsey and I were doing a couple days a week together. And then when the Jags came on, they had the idea for, hey, you guys, Dempsey was going to get the opportunity to do a show from down in the stadium every day, Monday through Friday, called Jaguars Today, which is obviously what we're doing now. And he was like, do you want to be a part of this? I was like, I want to be a part of this, right? Like, I would love to be a part of this. So we've been doing that show together since it went on air when the station got the rights to be the flagship home for the Jags. So we've been doing that show together since we got the Jags on the radio station, and it feels like it's growing, man. When we put the show together, the whole idea was we wanted to create a place for Jaguars fans to come together, right? Like, we wanted it to feel like a community. And like the fans had some ownership in what we were doing every day on the show. And we understood we're just doing 2 hours, and in season that'll feel real short, right? In June, there'll be Jaguars fans that are dying to hear anything about the Jags, right? And so we felt like it worked really well. We hear from fans all the time, one of those, why don't y'all do 3 hours in season? It's like, don't give me more work, one of those kind of things. But we'd be happy to, in season, we could do that show for 8 hours and you wouldn't run out of things to talk about. But we love doing it. We hope that it continues to be a place where Jaguars fans feel like they own it, right? Like it's their show, and we hope that comes across every day when we're doing it.
Yes, as a fan myself, I've actually called into the show a few times. I remember the first time years ago, man, my throat, my mouth got super dry. I was stuttering like crazy. I had no idea what I was talking about, to be honest. It was actually during the, I guess when the owners and the players there was a lockout, I believe. Yeah. And you guys were asking a question on our thoughts on who was right and who was wrong in our opinion. And I called in, and thank goodness both of you were very courteous in my letdown on what gibberish came out. And I've called a couple times since then, but as a fan, from a fan's perspective, I definitely feel like it's very, very, very fan friendly. And that's for myself at least. It's nice because we get the side from the media, from you guys, where you guys have a little bit more access and a little bit more knowledge on inside the building, like literally. So we get to hear that, but also you guys let us put our input, which is a lot of fun. So
which is part of the idea of the show too, right? It's why, we're in the end season mode now, have been for a couple of weeks with our guest lineup, right? So we have David Garrard in on Monday. Why wouldn't you want to have a former Jaguars quarterback in to talk about whatever he's seeing? He's still invested in the team. We have Jeff Lageman on Tuesdays, where we're checking the tape, trying to talk to him about what happened in the previous week's game. We got John Ogier on Wednesdays. We have Mike DeRocco, who's the beat guy for ESPN, on Thursdays with us every week during the season. We got Tommy Mack throughout the season and off season on Friday. He's year round with us on the show. So part of it is whatever information Mike and I don't have access to, we want to be talking to somebody that has access to that information, right? And a lot of times, practice, whatever's going on with that is while we're on air. So we can't necessarily get down there and see it, but we want to be talking to somebody as much as we can about what they are seeing so that we can, again, keep the fans feeling like they're involved with whatever's going on with the team as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. My favorite part of listening to the show was having those sports talks with like friends or coworkers and stuff like that. And then going to listen to the show like in the morning. And then hearing those same opinions that I just said the day before get expressed. And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I get to go back and win those arguments.
I say it often. Like, I get it. Like I get that guys have girlfriends, wives, whatever. They may have a group of friends who don't want to hear their opinion on this anymore, right? Yeah. Like their friends may be telling them, I don't need to have another conversation about who's going to be the third quarterback for the Jags. I don't care, right? Like we understand that you have your life outside of your sports fandom. We're not going to tell you to shut up about that. If you want to talk about whatever you want to talk about that's Jaguars related, bring it on, man. That never gets boring for us.
Yeah, same.
In your career as I don't know, what would you call it? Entertainer, broadcaster? In your career, what would you say is probably one of the more exciting experiences, one of the more memorable? I know you probably have several, but what's one of them?
I can remember, Dempsey and I, we would go to the Super Bowl every year and do the week on Radio Row, right? And the year that Blake Bortles was coming out in the draft, and we didn't have any inside information on, hey, the Jags are in on Blake Bortles. There wasn't any of that kind of thing going on, But I can remember he was in the room, right? Because he was a guy who could be a first-round pick, and those guys sometimes make their way around Radio Row. There at the Super Bowl, and it just happened to work out that I happened to be sitting at the table when Blake was walking by with his media guy. And I was like, hey, can we get 5 minutes with Blake Bortles? And they were like, yeah, we can get you 5 minutes. So I got to talk to Blake, months before he got drafted here, not having any idea that he was going to get drafted here in Jacksonville. Blake has always been super cool about any of that kind of stuff. It was funny that that's long enough ago. Like Blake Bortles going in the draft process, that was long enough ago that everywhere he sat down, he was being asked about that blonde girl he was dating, right? That was the first question Blake got asked everywhere it went. That's how long ago it was with Blake Bortles, but it's cool. And I've had, so many opportunities like that, where I've met, goodness only knows, how many players and athletes. I post game for Jaguars every Sunday. I'm sitting in a room with Fred Taylor for an hour talking Jaguars football, like who else gets to do something like that? It's unbelievable the opportunities as a sports fan that doing this job has given me.
That's incredible. One of the greatest running backs in the history of the NFL.
Absolutely.
Future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he ought to be.
What was your thought? What were your thoughts whenever they announced the pick for Bortles?
It better work for you, Mr. Caldwell, was the first thought that I had. Like you're going all in. If you're going to be a young general manager and you go quarterback that early in a draft, especially a quarterback like a Blake Bortles, who the questions were obvious, right? He is coming from UCF, and that's before UCF even became the UCF we know now, and so there were all these kind of question marks about him coming in. And I can remember the first day of rookie minicamp being out there, and the whole city is pumped. Right? They took a quarterback in the first round. Everyone's pumped up about it. You show up at that first day of rookie minicamp, and he threw the ball so miserably bad, like so miserably bad that we were all looking at each other like, what have they done? Like one of those kind of deals. The next day he was fine, and that began the whole process of before every game when Blake was here. You'd be in pregame. I'd be asking the guys in the booth. It's like, what did he look like in warmups? Because warmups are telling you whether we're going to get good or bad Blake today. And I love the guy, but that was just part of the process of that guy being your quarterback. And late in 2017, every week calling up to the booth, how's he look today? They're like, he looks great, right? And it's like, here we go with that defense and Blake playing as well as he did the back half of that season. They go to an AFC championship game, and he's still one of the coolest dudes, right? Like you can do nothing but pull for the guy, but It was every week, what are we going to get from this dude?
Theo White, one of our, one of our viewers says, facts, Blake was hit or miss.
No doubt.
Streak, kind of like a 3-point shooter in the NBA. Streaks, they can have hot streaks, they can have cold streaks, but when they hit. So speaking of that year, I know we didn't plan on talking about this, but talking about Blake Bortles in that year, 2017, very special, very unique. Coming off of a AFC South or AFC, not just AFC South, but AFC championship run. Compare that year compared to this year. I know we didn't make the championship game, but we were pretty close. And people have compared those two seasons, 2017 to last season, coming into this season. What is it from the media perspective and your perspective? What is the difference?
The difference, honestly, is the way the conversation around the second game of this year's regular season has been, right? Coming off the loss, and maybe part of that is it was the AFC championship game, right, where they lost to New England and you had Miles Jack wasn't down, right? The fans felt like the league robbed them in that moment of having the chance to play in their first Super Bowl, and understandably so. They probably did with that particular call. But everything was about, we're going to get him back week 2. Wait till New England gets here. And week 1 that season in 2018, they go up to the Giants, and they're not playing well. And Miles Jack has a late interception that seals that game to get him 1-0 to start that year. And everything was about the Patriots game week 2. Everything. The city was treating it like it was their AFC championship game. The hype was unbelievable. And they came through. Unfortunately, that was close to the end of it. in 2018. You know, like the energy just kind of left the team 4 weeks later with the trips to Dallas. And then, you know, it got real ugly in 2018. And this year, going through the offseason, look, people are excited about Kansas City week 2, but it's not near the same thing. And I think it's because everyone can feel it. This isn't a one-off, right? Like, this isn't a one-off. When you have a quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, this is the first of a decade and a half of being able to be competitive for a playoff spot, for a division championship. And if you're competitive for a division championship for 15 years, you're competing for a Super Bowl for 15 years. Like, that's realistic. And even with everything that went right for them in 2017, they had one player the entire year in 2017 that missed the game, Telvin Smith. They were unbelievably healthy that season, and the defense was ridiculous throughout the year. But it is different to me just looking at week 2, and it's funny that it's week 2 in both seasons, right? That it is the team that beat you in the playoffs coming to your house in week 2 the following season. But the fans aren't talking about that Kansas City game anywhere near the way they did that New England game. It's everyone kind of has the same kind of feeling to me. It's we're ready to go, right? And we'll take on Kansas City, and we'll take on Buffalo, and we'll take on Cincinnati, and we'll take on Baltimore, and bring on San Francisco, bring on all of them, right? We're going to win the division, and we're going to go to the divisional round of the playoffs and see what happens when we get there. Try to get at least one step further than they did the year before. They're a Super Bowl contender this year. It's legit. There's no question about that. They are a legit Super Bowl contender in the AFC.
Big picture. So you're saying everyone kind of understands the bigger picture. So even if we go out and lose to Kansas City again in week 2, which we totally can, it's not the end of the world, right?
No, not even close. No.
And there's people that are picking Trevor Lawrence to be their MVP for this year.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, the expectation is there, but it's also backed up by, you know, how good this team actually is.
Yeah.
And then how better it got in the offseason.
Yeah. Look, as good as they were last year, you are going to year 2 with Doug Peterson in this offense, Trevor Lawrence in that offense, and you add Calvin Ridley. Right? Like, there were questions going into the offseason, right? Not about whether or not he'd be reinstated. How serious is he about football at this point, right? Because of the way things ended in Atlanta. Well, he made that pretty clear pretty quick, right? With the Players Tribune article, everything about that, it was like, oh, this guy loves football, wants to get back on the field. And then once you saw it in training camp, it was day 1 at training camp where you were like, oh, no, it's like that, right? Yeah. With a guy like Calvin Ridley. And going through training camp in the preseason, that catch against Miami, are you kidding me?
Yes.
Right? That they added a guy to this offense with that quarterback, that coach calling plays that can do what Calvin Ridley can do athletically. I mean, take the roof off, man. The question marks they have, it's not at the skill positions on offense. I can tell you that.
From my perspective, what I really like about this team compared to that team from 2017 is we've got to me what I would think is the perfect mix. You've got talented players, all pro level players, but they also have the team first mentality. Whereas what a lot of people say is that a lot of that team was me versus team back in 2017. And I think, in my opinion, that's a big difference as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of dynamite with a lot of fuses lit in that locker room that was hard to see until it exploded, right? You know, a month into the season. I mean, Jalen Ramsey showing up with that truck and all that stuff for training camp, you know, and I never felt like the organization didn't want to figure out a way to keep and pay Jalen Ramsey. I never felt like that was what the issue was with it not having been done yet. And then the back and everything else. And there was so much about 2018. Like, you want to make a good documentary? Go look at that 2018 team and how, I mean, people were legitimately picking them as a Super Bowl contender coming off 2017, and 2018 went the way it did. I don't get any sense of that. going into this season.
Right. And look, he's already on a second team since he left us. So
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think people forget.
Jalen's going to Jalen, man. Yeah.
I can't hate him too much. I'm a big Knowles fan, so I can't hate him too much because he did a lot of good things for us in Tallahassee. So.
No doubt. Look, man, I don't hate him, right? Like, I really don't. I get tired of having to go through the same thing over and over. I hate what he did to the organization. And I don't know how, if you're a Jaguars fan, you can do anything except hate what he did to the organization. He quit on you. And if a guy is going to quit on you that blatantly, man, you can hold that against them the rest of his career. That doesn't mean you have to hate the guy.
Right.
But it's real. The back injury that he played a few weeks later after he got he was fine, right? Like, the whole thing was a lie. He wanted out, and people will say, well, he can do what's good for him. That's fine. I don't care what's good for Jalen Ramsey, right? I'm talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's all I care about in that equation is what's good for the franchise here in town. And what Jalen did, it's rotten, man. Absolutely rotten.
You know, if I could just take Calvin Ridley's fire and passion for the game and put it into, not to say that he's not passionate, Jalen Ramsey, but his
for sure
team player, being a team player and putting it all into it, no matter what uniform he's got on, put that into him, put that into CJ Henderson, put that into Telvin Smith. I mean, could you imagine the players we could have kept and had and the talent? Yeah, I know those are stories for another day, but
yeah. Get Blackman away from the bottle, those kind of things.
Man, what could have been with Blackman?
Mm-hmm.
I think about that too often.
Guy's still like 28.
He's not in Jacksonville anymore, right?
I don't think so. I'm not sure exactly where he is, though. I haven't heard anything about him in a while.
Yeah, it's probably good.
I wouldn't stay here if I were him. Bye.
All right, so we'll get down into what's on everybody's mind today, and that's the Jaguars' final roster. Looking at the cuts that the Jaguars made, I wasn't too surprised at any of them. Maybe Peterson's son, but that just would have been funny, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Rourke, but from my opinion, Rourke was fun to watch, and it'd be interesting to see how he grows in the league. But when you have, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, a team ready to win the Super Bowl now, you don't gamble on exciting on the most important position, not only in football, but potentially in all of sports. And Beathard, he knows the system. It's his second year in. I am completely fine and okay with Beathard staying and Rourke going. Have you heard any rumblings from the fan base at all if they were upset about that move?
I thought we might, right, when it became a story after week 1 of the preseason and built through week 2, and you heard a lot of noise after those first 2 weeks of the preseason. I think Beathard and the way he played in week 3 kind of did something to settle that down a little bit. And beyond that, the team is in such a good place right now that when Doug Peterson, after week 2 of the preseason, when he stands up there and says, no, Beathard's the backup, right? Like, there was no hesitation from Coach Peterson. No, Beathard's the backup. That I think even fans who felt like they may have wanted to push it were like, I don't know, Coach seems to know what he's doing, right? Like one of those kind of things. Yeah. And so it wasn't as much noise. I thought throughout the entire thing, and we discussed it on the show several times, it always made more sense to me that CJ Beathard, being the veteran, having been around the league for a while, he's a better voice in the locker room for Trevor Lawrence to, bounce things off of than Rourke would be, that kind of thing. I thought the whole time that Beathard would be the guy that would make the most sense. I thought the whole time too that trying to carry 3 quarterbacks on a roster where the offensive line decisions look like what they were going to look like because of the injuries to the backups that they were having to deal with, right? To figure out how do we get who we want on the 53. The pressure that came through, right? They wind up keeping 7 wide receivers. Would you rather them have kept Rourke than a seventh wide receiver. Like, and I think most people land squarely on no, to that kind of question, given how the receivers played throughout the entirety of the preseason, to ever think that it was a high likelihood that a guy that had never taken an NFL snap was going to be kept on the 53 so that they could keep him inactive as an emergency third quarterback on game days. It seemed unlikely the entire time. I think they'll get him back on the practice squad on waivers. I don't think anyone's picking him up. You could see it this week 3 of the preseason. How many teams had their third, fourth quarterback go out and light it up this week? Well, they're probably going to land on the practice squad of whatever team they just lit it up for, right? Like, that's the likely scenario of what's going to happen. I don't think it's a big risk trying to get into the practice squad at all.
I think what surprised me the most, I'm not necessarily surprised that they did let him go, but I know that there was a lot of high praise for Garrett Prince during the preseason.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen to him? Do you think we'll be able to keep him on the practice squad, or he'll get picked up by somebody else?
I think the most likely scenario is that he ends up on the practice squad. The athleticism that he has, he's probably the one that I'm looking at going, maybe, someone picks him up. There may be one of those wide receivers that you'd really like to get back right to the practice squad, but he'll get picked up. I think those kind of things are in play. Garrett Prince, he felt like one of these guys. He had a really, really good first couple weeks of camp. It never showed up on the field in the preseason games, right? And it's not because they didn't give him opportunities. And it's one of the things we talked about with Jeff Lageman today on the show is the 4 tight ends that were here, right, that had a chance to make the roster. Well, 3 of them did, and Prince being the 4th didn't. And when talking to Logs about it, he's like, he just doesn't block it anywhere near the level those other 3 guys do. And I know Evan Ingram has talked about is that receiving whatever. Evan is so willing to do the blocking when he's asked to do it. Evan Ingram had really the block that kind of created the lane for Etienne to score the rushing touchdown he had against Miami this week. Like, since he got here, he's been very willing to do that part of the job. And it allows so much flexibility in the offense when you can put more guys at the tight end position on the field that give you that two-way go, right? Like, you don't see Evan Ingram lined up on the end of the line of scrimmage and think, well, it's still a pass. They're not going to ask this guy to block anybody. He can, right? And when you have that look now with 3 tight ends basically in your offense, Ingram's clearly the biggest receiving threat, right? There's no doubt about that. But when Strange has been a monster blocking throughout camp in all 3 preseason games. He had a block Saturday night against Miami, the first offensive play of the game for the Jags on the handoff to Etienne. Strange, if he had held his block for another just split second, I think Etienne's out the gate, right? Like, it was that kind of close. And Strange has been burying people throughout the preseason in the run game. Like, it's been so much fun to watch. And you have Farrell on top of that. That's what he's known for. So you have 3 tight ends, the 3 they kept on the roster. They can do whatever they want to with all 3 of those guys. And it gives an offense being run by Coach Peterson, who likes tight ends, and he likes them in part because you can't game plan. You can't just say, oh, run, oh, pass, because of the personnel on the field with the tight ends. Well, he's got 3 on the roster right now that don't give away run pass, which you're trying to do when they're out there being asked to do anything in the offense right now.
What went through your mind when the Jaguars and Evan Ingram finally inked that long-term contract? That was always the result that made the most sense. Right, was to get the long-term deal done and have Evan Ingram here. It was the best fit for Evan Ingram. It's the best fit for the Jaguars. It was the most comfortable solution the entire time. I'm glad that it finally got done, because if looking at it from Ingram's perspective, where are you going to go? Yeah. Right? Where are you going to go as a tight end in the league right now that
to a team that needs a tight end as much as the Jaguars would if Evan Ingram wasn't here in the building, right? Where are you going to go where you're in a better situation than playing for that coach with that quarterback? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, please. Let's figure out how to get 3 more years of me being able to be a part of this offense. It's what made the most sense the whole time.
From my as a Jaguars fan perspective, I don't think I don't even think most Jaguars fans realize and understand the lack of talent that we've had at the tight end position. Like pure pass catching, like Mercedes Lewis, he's a special player in Jaguars history because he was just here for forever, and he had some good games and good semi good seasons, I think. But we've never had a pass catching tight end of Evan Ingram's caliber. And it's from a fan's perspective, it's just so nice to see not only the Jaguars able to get one, but to keep them in house and know that was the right decision to be made.
And he wanted to be.
Yeah,
here.
the closest they've had in that regard probably goes all the way back to Pete Mitchell.
Yes.
Yeah, and wanted to be here. And isn't that nice? Yeah. Like as Jaguars fans, being out there and watching players that get here and want to stay. And that should tell you all you need to know about your quarterback for real.
Yeah.
Like when they get here, people are like, yeah, I want to be a part of this. That kind of thing. It was cool to hear like Calais Campbell say that kind of thing when he signed here in free agency in 2017, right? He was like, I can see the path to them being competitive now. That made it happen.
Cody, do you have any thoughts on the final roster?
I shared something today. It was the Seth Williams catch. And I was like, how talented is this wide receiver core that we let this guy walk off of here? Like, it is insane that the 7 wide receivers that we have right now, where would you rank them in Jaguars history?
Oh, as a group?
Yeah.
Whew. I think as a group, it's hard to say that, from 1 to 7 that it's not the best they've ever had, right? Like I still think if you're just talking top 2, Jimmy and Keenan are right, and should be, but it's the third guy in that group, Willie Jackson, early on, that kind of thing. Like it kind of rotated in and out. Maybe the next best group after that is when Hearns was a rookie, and they had A-Rob and Marquise Lee, right? Like that was a good group, but it's not this. Like Calvin Ridley legit could be one of the top 10 receivers in the game again. When he gets back in, being in this offense with this quarterback, like he can legit get to that kind of ceiling here in Jacksonville. And you combine that with Christian Kirk, who was great his first year here in Jacksonville. Well, now he's playing his more comfortable position from the slot. He's one of the best route runners in the league from the slot. Those option routes, he's ridiculous. And Zay Jones may have had the best camp he's had of his career, right? And he's coming off the best season of his career on top of that. And then you get to the back half of the depth chart. I mean, I can't remember the Jags ever having a wide receiver depth chart that had a guy as dangerous as Jamal Agnew at 4 or 5 on the depth chart, right? Like that dude, the ball gets in his hands. He is lightning, man. You can do things with that. And it's exciting to see what they have planned for it in 2023.
What about our Cecil Shorts years?
Oh, those poor Cecil Shorts years where you were just, can we get a guy to get to 1,000 yards for the first time in a decade? That kind of thing. First time since Jimmy left. You were waiting on it to happen again. And look, I love Cecil. He's a really good dude. Yeah. And, I've talked to him a lot over the years, but he's no fool. He knows, right? Like those teams weren't any good that he had to play on. I'm sorry that he didn't get to play on a team that was this good while he was in Jacksonville.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. I remember some seasons where it's like our number 1 probably wouldn't even be a number 2 on most teams in the NFL some years.
Oh, for sure.
Those wide receiver cores. Where now it's like we have a couple that could probably go be number 1s elsewhere. I don't know if it was you or if it was Dempsey that had said during training camp, if you're an outsider looking in and you had no idea who was who on the depth chart, Zay Jones, a lot of people would probably point at Zay Jones as being the number one. Was that you or
That was Dempsey.
that was Dempsey? How did you
Yeah.
feel about that?
I think Zay was really interesting when they signed him because Mike and I both reacted the same way, right? That contract to that guy, we both looked at each other the day that it got announced and we were like, why are they doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, what is this guy's role even going to be in this? What has he done to earn this kind of money?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it just didn't make any sense to us. It was like, I guess we'll see. Well, we saw, you know, Zay had a really good first year here in Jacksonville. And as I said, Calvin Ridley's been the story of the offseason and training camp for the team, and for good reason. But Zay Jones has been about as good, right? Like he can't do athletically what Calvin can do. And that's not his fault. He's Zay Jones. He's not Calvin Ridley. But he does present, I think, what's going to be a legit goal line threat for this offense here in 2023. I'm curious to see what kind of dividends it pays because I think he's likely to be the guy when they line up in two wide receiver sets. I wouldn't be surprised if Zay is the guy that is more commonly opposite of Calvin Ridley than Christian would be this year. So his opportunities should be a little bit, you know, more involved from a fantasy football perspective, which you guys probably know we talk about quite a bit on the show from time to time. I think if you're in especially a league where you're not just drafting with a bunch of Jaguars fans, if you're in a league where you're getting Zay Jones as your third wide receiver, you're doing pretty well. Because I think from a fantasy perspective, he has a legit chance to give you mid wide receiver 2 value this season.
I did that just the other day. Drafted him, I think, in the 3rd or 4th round. So I was super excited about that. I think a lot of people outside of Jacksonville just aren't aware. And I remember when we did, like you said, when we did pick up Zay Jones, I remember, wasn't it we had let DJ Chark go? And
they had decided not to figure out how to keep him in the building. Yeah.
And I remember looking at him like, well, Chark is service when he's on the field. I mean, he's a very good wide receiver. And to me, it puzzled. It was almost, to me, it seemed like swap in, swap out the same guy. But I feel like Zay was that was such an excellent pickup and plug into the team. And what's great is he performed so well in his first year, and it wasn't even a prove it contract. It was a 3-year contract. So it's not like he was balling out to get that big money contract. He's still got 2 more years before he can get another contract. I mean, maybe an extension's in the works sooner than that, but I'm excited to see what he has for us moving forward.
No doubt. Yeah. Zay is a really good player, and you put a bunch of good players in the hands of Doug Peterson, I think good things are going to happen, right? Like I never bought into the hype around we got to have 2 tight ends. I was like, nah, I think Doug figured it out with 2 tight ends because he knew that's what he needed to do to win in Philadelphia. And watching the way they ran the offense last year here made that even more clear to me. It's like he is a great offensive coach in mind, and he's going to put his players in their best position to succeed. And when you have that in combination with the talent of Trevor Lawrence and his ability to see the same things and be more comfortable in what they're trying to do, it's not a question as to why the hype is what it is around Jacksonville right now. It's those 2 guys. That's why the hype is what it is, because you can look at this team and legit have questions about the offensive line. You can look at this team and legit have questions about the defensive line, right? Like where are the sacks going to come from for this team this year? They got questions on both lines of scrimmage, and I feel very comfortable saying they're going to win the AFC South, right? Like that's how much of a gap they have between themselves and anybody else in the division with Doug Peterson and head coach and Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. It's a canyon between them and anybody else at those 2 spots right now.
Do you see potential trades happening for pass rush in the future for the Jags? I mean, before the regular season starts, at least.
I don't think so. I think it's hard to find any of that kind of stuff on the waiver wire. Teams just aren't going to let guys that can rush the passer go.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I doubt they're going to be able to get it there. If they were going to kick the tires on something like Melvin Ingram, I think they would have done it already.
Right.
That kind of thing. You heard the Jadeveon Clowney coming in for a visit, that kind of thing. You knew there was some interest on both sides with Yannick Ngakoue, but it didn't turn into anything right at the time. And I think all those guys made sense to add somebody to that room. I think in my mind, it's like 97, 98, 2, 3. That what they have in the room right now is what they're going to have as far as the pass rush. And we'll see. It's a heck of a gamble for a team that I do think is Super Bowl competitive this year to go into the season with what they have at pass rush going into the year. But I think that's ultimately what's going to wind up happening.
Interesting. I had heard on the show, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but that they're potentially waiting till after the first game because then their contract isn't guaranteed.
Yeah.
But doing that, you also possibly miss out on somebody that you may want.
You may. That was a while ago, right? That was before training camp started that we were really talking about that kind of angle to it. And players can get termination pay, right? If they're on the active roster week 1. You have to be on the active roster week 1 to get your termination pay. And that basically means even if you get cut, you get to one time in your career take termination pay, which means you get whatever your salary was going to be.
Okay.
Right? So because there were so many pass rushers that were still available in veteran free agency, the idea at that point was, well, maybe they're going to wait and see, maybe after week 1 is when they want to make that kind of move. And I don't think that's impossible. Melvin Ingram, like I said, he's still out there. And I think he would be a really good fit to bring in as a guy to be your third pass rusher. Like, he is way better than Kayvon Chason, right? In that kind of role, way more dangerous in that kind of position. So maybe that's something that's still in their minds that they're thinking about a little bit that they could do. And it may not happen until after week 1 of the regular season, but the market has shrunk, right? Like, if you're going to go get any kind of impact right now, the list is basically Melvin Ingram, right? So in free agency, it's that. I think it's hard to figure out exactly what a trade would look like right now, to figure out what those pieces would look like, which is why I say I think overwhelmingly it's likely that what they have in the room is what they're going to have.
With Josh Wells on the IR, what do you foresee the Jaguars making any more moves there?
I think it tells you how they feel about Blake Hance, right? That they feel confident enough in Blake Hance that he can be the swing tackle for the team, and that they're comfortable with that being the direction they go going into the season. We'll see when they're able to get a guy like Cooper Hodges back. Like, the depth on the offensive line looked really good 3 weeks ago. And then, they started dropping like flies as we were going through the preseason, and you had the entirety of the depth tested by the time you got to the end of the preseason. And it's a bummer that Josh Wells has the injury and can't be the swing tackle, because as swing tackles go, I felt fine with that. Right? Like, I felt completely okay with that. I understood more and more thinking back about, like, the team not playing Walker Little against Miami Saturday, right? And at first that felt weird. And then as I had a few days to think about it, I was like, no, that was the right call, right? If there's anything going on with him at that point in time, I don't want to go into Indianapolis with Blake Hance starting at left tackle. If something stupid happens today, right? Which they could have been in that position. So, look, you're going to have to play him at some point. You risk injury every time you put anybody on the field. But there was no reason to risk injury to your opening day left tackle with anything at all, a question mark going into that game Saturday against Miami. It felt like they did kind of the same thing with Kayvon Chason. Look, whatever everyone feels about Kayvon Chason, the team feels the way they feel about him, right? He's the third guy. He's the first guy off the bench right now in that position. They don't have any depth at outside linebacker. They just don't have any. He is the depth. Him and Abdullah are the depth on the roster at that position. So if he had anything in pregame where it was like, yeah, this kind of feels weird, it's like, all right, we'll see you in a couple weeks. You know, there's just no reason to push any of that. And look, I'm with most of the fans. I don't expect anything out of Kayvon Chason this year. If he gave me 3, I'd do jumping jacks, right? You know, like I don't expect anything out of the guy this season, but he is what they have, and he is the best they have behind Trayvon Walker on that strong side, outside linebacker. He is what they have at this point, and the options to improve on that on the waiver wire and the trade market, they're thin because nobody's letting guys go that can help you in that specific spot.
Yeah, Kayvon Chason. I feel like that's a conversation that we keep rehashing year after year.
Yeah,
he's doing nothing. Why does the team love him? Because we just don't see it on the field. Or what does he know about the owner that's keeping him on the team? That's kind of where I'm at now.
I don't think it's like anything like that, but he does give. I mean, he gives them everything they want in special teams, and I get it. Like that rings so hollow with the fans. I understand why it rings hollow with the fans, but it doesn't ring hollow in the room.
Yeah.
With those guys, right? Like those kind of things matter. Knowing what you can get out of somebody and knowing when you ask them to give it, they give it to you, right? Is a valuable thing in the league. And I don't think they're asking Kayvon or will ask Kayvon Chason to give him 6 sacks. I just don't. I think they're going to ask him to play maybe 15% of the defensive snaps this year and give them everything he has on special teams, that kind of thing. And if he gives them 2 or 3 sacks, they, like me, will be like, good year, Kayvon. Right? Like I really do feel like that's kind of where it's at going into the season with him. And I would expect Yasir Abdullah to be the much more impactful pass rusher for the team. I'm curious to see how they, figure out reps with those guys until, especially, DeJuan Smoot's not back yet. So it'll change a little bit when Smoot gets back later in the year as far as the rotation of those guys. But you go back and look at Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, the expectation should be they're going to play the 2 of those guys somewhere between 75% and 80% of the defensive snaps all year. So really you're talking about we got to find somebody else to play 1 in 4 or 5 snaps, right? And it's not that you don't want some kind of impact from that spot, but that's the reality of it, right? And you don't have an Arden Key anymore who you feel like you can flex inside and do those things. You get that back a little bit when you get DeJuan Smoot back and whatever he's going to be coming off that Achilles obviously is a big deal too. But there's not much there. So fans that are questioning it, you should question it. It's the big question going into the season. Can they hit the opposing quarterback?
Yeah. One other item, and I know we're getting close to time, but I thought this might be important to talk about was Chris Claybrooks been placed on the exempt commissioner permission list. For those that maybe aren't aware of how that works, do you kind of want to go into a little bit of what's going on with Chris?
Essentially, he's and isn't part of the team right now. Can't be around it. Essentially, he's suspended without them calling it suspended, kind of thing. You're just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen, right? And when whatever Roger Goodell deems the process to be, which is hard to even nail down, what exactly that means. I thought when everything happened with Chris over the course of the offseason that it was going to be really tough for him to make the 53, with 2 situations hanging over your head coming out of a single offseason. It just felt unlikely to me that he's going to make the 53. Then as we got through the preseason and nothing was happening, I don't know why the wheels on this kind of stuff turn so slow for the league. This is months ago, guys.
Yeah.
Right? The team's gone through an entire preseason and training camp. You can't give them some kind of heads up as to what you're planning to do so that they can figure out what they want to do with Chris Claybrooks, right? And how much he should or shouldn't be part of their plans. I don't know why the league needs to drag its feet as much as they did. We were talking to Loggeman about that today. He thought Clay Brooks was on the 53 because of what he gives the team on special teams. That he was going to be one of the corners on the roster because of what he gives the team on special teams. Why would the team have to go through all of this preparation for the 2023 season without knowing whether or not he was going to be a part of it? And maybe they had more word than we knew, about that kind of thing as far as what was going to go down. They knew long before it was announced on the Cam Robinson suspension. Like they knew before, a month and a half before the draft, something crazy, right? Like they knew for a while what that situation was going to be, that kind of thing. I think Clay Brooks, it's unfortunate, right? To put yourself in those kind of situations. Keep your hands off people, man. Like that's not a hard rule. Keep your hands off people. There's no reason to get yourself in that kind of situation. So it's not that I feel bad for him necessarily having to face this kind of suspension. I don't understand why the league wants to go so slow with letting teams know so that they can adjust how they want to deal with a situation like that. And so, it's just another one of those from the league that I just scratch my head at how they drag their feet making any of these kind of decisions.
Yeah, you brought up Cam Robinson, and I've been dying to ask somebody from 1010 this because during the draft before that, like people were making their draft selections, and I still had somebody from defensive end position like as a number one slot, but I seen a lot of 1010 people pick offensive line, and I was like, how soon did y'all know about the Cam Robinson situation? Because I didn't find out until I think it was either draft day or the day after. But it seemed like
I found out. I found out same time you did.
Okay.
Right. That's when it became clear to me. And there were people on the station that were all on board with drafting offensive line when the season ended last year. Right. So that kind of thing wasn't new.
It wasn't insider information. It was just
as far as I know, it wasn't.
That's what
it's like. I was like, if they had it, I wish they would have given it to me. It certainly would have helped the show if I had some clue that was going on for the that 6 weeks leading up to the draft, so that I could be the guy that was banging the drum on that. I think offensive line is what makes sense here in the first round, because I was defensive end. I was right there with you. I wanted Miles Murphy bad.
Me too.
That's the guy that I wanted. And then everything happened, that the day of the draft, and it's like, well, now it has to be offensive tackle. And then by the time they were on the clock, it has to be Anton Harrison, because what else are they going to do at offensive tackle if they're doing that? So that's what it wound up being. I will say Anton's looked really good in the preseason. I thought he looked real good Saturday night against Miami. Every time I looked up on a run play, he was on the second level blocking a linebacker after coming off his first block. Like I thought he played real well on Saturday night against Miami. Hopefully that shoulder holds up.
Yeah, a couple of games ago, there was a replay of him picking up a double, and I was like, oh, rookie's doing that?
He did it a lot Saturday night. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. Speaking of Anton, now I don't blame Juwan Taylor for going to get that massive payday. I would have done the same thing. You give me that money, I'll go be your kicker. I don't care. So I don't blame him for that at all. Plus, he gets to play a premier position at left tackle. Do you think the Jaguars are going to miss him on the offensive line this season, or do you think what they've put together, they'll be fine?
I think it's both. To be honest with you, I think in the end they're going to be fine because of the kind of offense they run and how quickly Trevor can get the ball out of his hand, and all of that ought to be even faster this year. Again, just comfort in the offense for Trevor Lawrence. And I think part of what happened last year with the offense was that, right? Trevor gets the ball out quick. So whatever deficiencies you have along the offensive line can be hidden,
right,
to some degree, by how quickly Trevor reads it, right, and gets the ball out of his hand. And Doug Peterson's not stupid. Like, he knows what he does and doesn't have. And again, that goes to that conversation we were having about Doug does a fantastic job of playing to the strengths of his guys, right? He knows what he does and doesn't have on the offensive line. And I don't think he's going to put them in a bunch of situations where they can get embarrassed by what happens up front. I don't think the offensive line is great, but I think it's good enough. I think it's good enough for them to win big, to be honest with you. We've seen other offenses do it. Cincinnati's offensive line was garbage 2 years ago.
Yes.
And went to a Super Bowl. You can find ways to do those kind of things. It's not that I don't want to see them get better on the offensive line. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that you can – that's why you coach, and that's why you scheme.
Right.
Because you know what needs to be protected on your roster when you're doing those kind of things. And I think it's easier to protect it on offense than it is on defense. Defense, you have a hole, everyone's going to be punching in that hole. That's just the nature of it. Offense, okay, their left guard's a bit of a weakness. Okay. Right. All right. We'll keep a back in. We'll keep another tight end in. They'll do different things to cover that kind of thing up so that it doesn't kill them when everything is said and done.
Right. And I think you've kind of alluded to it. Having what many people say is a generational quarterback, but a top 10, top 5, top 3 quarterback covers up so many things that you might be missing on the offense, where that's just something we haven't had in the past since maybe Brunell. To have a quarterback here that, his legs can, make up for maybe some miscues on the offensive line, letting the ball go quicker, the quicker, smarter decision making. It's so refreshing to be a fan of a team finally that not only has figured out here and there, they've figured it out. I feel like you got the coach, you've got the quarterback, you're drafting personnel that are making a difference sooner rather than later, or not leaving at all. It's just so refreshing to be a fan finally of this team. I feel like we've suffered for so many years, and it's almost, I still want to be hesitant on my optimism though, because we've been burnt in the past as Jaguars fans, but I feel like this might be the real deal. I don't know.
I got the same feeling, guys. This feels as tangible a chance to re-find whatever that magic was for that first half decade, right? Where that run from 96 to 99, it was unreal, right? You went to 2 AFC championship games. You were in the playoffs every year. They haven't been to back-to-back playoff seasons since 99. Right? It's been a long, long time, but it does feel like the window is opening now, and that it's not going to close until Trevor hangs it up, right? When Trevor comes back down to earth, that's when the franchise comes back down to earth. That's the way that it feels right now. And, you have Trent Baalke in the booth Saturday night in Miami, and he's being asked about, long-term extension stuff with Trevor. And he's been asked about that a couple times recently. He's like, oh yeah, we're thinking about it. It's yeah, get it done, man.
Yeah.
Give us a decade, please.
Yes.
Give us a decade of knowing every year before the season starts. Yeah, we are one of the teams that's competing at the absolute highest level because we got a quarterback who's going to have us competing against anybody at any time in any week. He gives you a chance. And no, the franchise hasn't had anything close to that since Mark Brunell. And look, Trevor's going to lap Mark Brunell soon, right? And on that kind of list, he's just, the talent that he has is unbelievable. And the heights that he could potentially reach in his career. Look, Mark went to 2 AFC championship games. So there's a bar that Trevor Lawrence has to reach. It's not like it's not there, but I think I'd be surprised and disappointed if Trevor doesn't reach it.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely has that potential. And hopefully, it's 48 years old and he decides to retire, and the Jags have won like 10 Super Bowls.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to have
like
a guy like that. That'd be fun. Yeah. The whole nation's sick of hearing his name. Can we stop already? Can we stop already? It's like, let us have one of those guys, please. Just one.
Once Trevor retires, an all-time great, we can put him past Brunell. Dan Marino.
That kind of thing. Yeah, no doubt.
I'm just kidding. He'll probably he doesn't need to do that. Just one of the few
he'll get there.
Shining moments in Jaguars history. 62-7.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Cody, before we end, Cody, do you have anything you want to talk about? Question?
I feel like we covered pretty much everything, man. It's been really fun, like talking to you, getting to know you through this, and listening to you on the radio. And you just seem like a bro, like somebody I could hang out with and just talk football. So that's awesome, man. It's good to meet you.
It's all football. It was a pleasure to come on with you guys, and believe me, it's funny, when I made the comment about I understand it, like having your friends, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever. Mm-hmm. That's like, I don't want to hear about this anymore. Like, I understand exactly what that's like. Like, most of my friends, they don't care about sports at all. Oh. Right? Like, at all. Like, I have a few friends that we talk about it a lot, when we're around each other. But most of my friends, it's just not something they're interested in. And it's cool, right? Like, I'm glad that I have the outlet of doing Jaguars Today so that I can get it out, right? Like, get that venom out of me. Like, I'm not putting it on anybody else. And so I understand it. Like, anybody who just feels like they don't have that, I hope, all this stuff, man, all the shows, all the podcasting like this, all that kind of stuff, man, wherever you can go to interact and get it out, when you got whoever it is in your life that's saying, do we have to talk about this? Like, I really want to talk about this. Like, this is really important to me to get my opinion out and somebody react to it, to bounce it off somebody. I 100% understand it, man. And there are a few things in life I enjoy more than just talking sports. When it's with somebody that I know is as or more into it than I am, there's not much in the world that's better than that.
Right. Yeah. What I really appreciate about not just Jaguars Today, but 1010XL overall, but especially Jaguars Today, you guys, there might be a little homerism in there, but for the most part, you guys are very, very honest about the Jaguars, and maybe it's just because of the numbing that we've had as observers of the Jaguars over the years. But it's nice to be able to listen in and be like, okay, that's cold hard truth. Like, it hurts what Tony's saying about my Jaguars, but it's true. And it's just refreshing to be able to turn in and not have to hear that homerism. Not to say there aren't any at 1010XL. Hacker.
I can take that up with them.
No, so I just kind of want to thank you guys. We appreciate your show. It's great.
I appreciate it, man. Truly, I do, and I hope again that we're providing a service for the fans. That's the idea. And when we started doing Jaguars Today, and we've shared this on air several times, but like Mark Lamping came to us, and because there is kind of that, what can and can't we do, right? We're in the building every day at that point in time. We're in the building every day, and the team stinks. Like, we're gonna have to say something mean about somebody at some point in time. That's just the honest thing to say. And I can remember Mark Lamping was talking to Dempsey and I, and he was like, whatever it is, you say it. Don't hold anything back. Right? Like, there's no reason not to say it. We know when we're bad. You're not helping anybody by not pointing it out, because, look, man, y'all know, you're fans. When you're not getting what feels like the truth about it, right? Like the real, honest, this is the way the world works kind of truth about that kind of, it's insulting, right? Like, nobody's dumb enough to not see when they're not doing the right thing, right? When they're bad, they're bad. You can't twist 2015 as anything other than they stink, right? Like, there's nothing else that you can do. You can react to it week to week about why, and what they need to get better at. But if you're trying to paint it as anything other than what it is, man, people will see through that so quick. And we do. We're just trying to share our own opinions on whatever the heck it is that's going on with the team. And people have reacted to it the entire time. We want their reactions to continue. And look, we've been doing the show for a while now. It hadn't been a season like this that we've had. The hype is unreal. And I can't wait to see what that's going to look like week to week. When we expect Victory Mondays, boy, you watch out for what we're going to be doing on Jaguars Today for sure.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again, Tony, for coming on. We really do appreciate it. For our audience, if you want to let them know where to find you and your shows and whatnot.
Jaguars Today, obviously, Monday through Friday, 10 to noon at 1010XL. Fat Tony, as you got up there on the screen. They're on X. Am I still allowed to say Twitter? I don't even know how any of that works at this point in time. I work on Jaguars pre and post on Radio Game Day, so I'll be down there for those as well. I'm play-by-play voice of the Bulldogs on 1010XL, so we'll be back on Friday night. The Bulldogs are taking on Mandarin 6:30, so I'll be on air as the play-by-play voice of that. Been doing that for a number of years now. That's an absolute ball to be able to get involved in that kind of thing. And again, Jaguars Today, Monday through Friday, 10 to noon.
Shout out Mandarin too. Carson Beck just got named starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs. Yeah. So
is Bowles are they going to have a good year this year?
Oh, well, they never have a bad year,
right?
Right. They're Bowls. But they blew a 15-point lead going into the fourth quarter against St. Augustine last Friday in the opening weekend of the year, and lost on a touchdown with 15 seconds left to Hewlett is the name of the quarterback over there at St. Augustine. He's a Wake Forest commit, and he stuck a dagger in their heart. I'm curious to see how they bounce back against the Mandarin team that is loaded this year over there with the Mustangs, so it should be fun on Friday night.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were the play-by-play. I'll have to take a gander because we all know I'm a graduate of Ridgeview High School, so our football was
cool.
It was a social event. It wasn't a football event.
Yeah,
so,
I know
Bowles.
I'm a Wolfson guy, so I know the exact feeling. Yeah.
Yes. Well, again, we appreciate Tony Smith for joining us today. You can find us at fanbattlesports.com. There you can find content from all teams in the AFC South, including the Jaguars Fan Battle. And you can find me at Matthew G Sports on X, formerly known as Twitter. What about you, Cody?
And at Cody Cole Gaming on X.
Awesome. Yep. Well, appreciate you guys joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.